Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for today's free webinar, Coming to America, Bringing Your Startup to the U.S. Part 1, with John Bridenstine from the U.S. Embassy London, Daniel Glazer from Fried Frank, Ben Parkinson from the U.S. Department of State, and Glenn McRae from Early Growth Financial Services. My name's Erica Melsberg, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for Early Growth Financial Services, and I'll be your moderator today. This presentation is going to run about 40 minutes. If you have questions as we go along, please feel free to enter them in the question field, or you can also tweet them to us at earlygrowthfs with the hashtag StartupToUS. We're going to try to answer questions as they come, or we'll wait until the Q&A at the end to address your questions. And if we do run out of time, we will be sure to follow up via Twitter or email after the presentation so that all questions will be answered. I want to start by introducing our presenters. We're very pleased to have with us today Daniel Glazer. Dan leads the technology practice at Fried Frank, a leading New York-based international law firm with offices throughout the U.S., Europe, and Asia. Dan's resident in the firm's New York and London offices, where he works with some of the world's largest companies in their most significant technology-focused transactions, as well as emerging companies seeking to expand to the U.S. He regularly partners with government organizations and accelerators, including Techstars London, Seed Camp, and Startup Bootcamp, to provide early-stage companies with access to legal and multidisciplinary mentoring on U.S. expansion. He's also authored the comprehensive Coming to America, a U.S. legal guide for non-U.S. companies, which will be provided in the appendix in today's presentation. Tech City News recently named Dan one of the top 10 international connectors in London's tech community. So welcome and good morning to you, Daniel. We also have with us today John Bridenstine, Minister Counselor for Commercial Affairs, U.S. Embassy London. John arrived in the United Kingdom as Minister Counsel for Commercial Affairs. His previous assignments included U.S. Consul General in Hermosillo, Mexico, and Regional Director for Commercial Service Operations in Europe and Eurasia, as well as postings in Mexico City, Kabul, Ankara, Tashkent, Kuwait City, and Munich. Before joining the Foreign Service, John worked for International Paper. He's a 1984 graduate of Davidson College in North Carolina and studied international relations at the University of Miami and Free University of Berlin. Welcome to you, John. You're welcome. And we have Ben Parkinson today, Treaty Visa Analyst for the U.S. Department of State. Ben's the sole analyst in the UK for the U.S. State Department's E1 and E2 Treaty Trader and Treaty Investor Visa programs for foreign companies who are looking to set up operations in the United States. To date, he's performed over 1,700 comprehensive reviews on UK, European businesses seeking a business visa to the U.S. Welcome to you, Ben. And last but certainly not least, we have Glenn McRae. Glenn is Chief Strategy Officer for Early Growth Financial Services, an outsourced financial services firm that provides accounting, CFO, strategic finance, tax, and valuation services to small to mid-sized companies throughout the U.S. Glenn's an experienced CPA with extensive early-stage company experience. So welcome to you, Glenn.
Thank you.
So today we'll be covering a lot of information. We'll be discussing some of the advantages of bringing your business to the U.S., some practical advice for getting here, legal and staffing considerations, business visas and visa requirements, and accounting and tax considerations. So that said, Glenn, can you please kick us off by talking a little bit about the U.S. startup ecosystem?
Yeah, I'd love to, Erica. Good day, everyone. I think we're going to try to provide a lot of practical how-to information in today's webinar, but what I wanted to do is just share with you a little bit of the why. What would get you excited about coming to the United States? I think that in today's day and age, there's a level playing field when it comes to certain technologies, hardware, software, even capabilities. So, start. And I think that out here, I'm based in Silicon Valley in the United States, and what we call it here is the startup ecosystem. That concept of used other places, but what it means here is that the integrated system of service providers, access to capital, as well as founders that are all working together for a common goal. And that common goal is a liquidity event, ultimately. But to get to a liquidity event, which means selling your company to a bigger entity or maybe even going public, before you get to that liquidity event, there's an awful lot of little things that need to happen. so that you can achieve success. The obvious one is that we have a venture capital community in the United States that's well established, that has a logical progression from the seed stage to the A to the B, and likewise, all the way up to the liquidity event. So that's obviously something that would be important to someone coming over here who's trying to access capital. But even prior to that, the idea of a service provider here in the United States might be a little bit different than what you're used to. The folks such as Dan Glazer, who's on the phone, who's a high-priced attorney, very competent, used to dealing with the highest levels of corporate America, he's tailored his practice to be accessible to the startup folks, people such as yourself. And that means that their services are tailored, their pricing is tailored, as well as their extra efforts that they're going to make to try to make introductions for you. The same is true for my firm, my business. We have very senior and accomplished professionals on our team, and we make them available to startup founders at a very cost-effective point. But beyond that, we're working to make introductions. We're building our business around what you need to know to be a successful startup entrepreneur. And I think you'll find the same is true in the banking industry, in the human resources, which is payroll and insurance and employee benefits and those sorts of things. You'll find access to high-level service providers who are tailoring their business to help the startups be more successful, making introductions, not even charging a fee for some of these things that they're doing for you. But there really is a concept of what is called paying it forward, trying to add value, trying to be meaningful, and helping people along the way. And I think that what you'll find when you come to the U.S. is that you want to find those kinds of service providers, those kinds of investors, those kinds of folks who get what you're all about and take a vested interest in trying to help you be successful.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Glenn. Now I'd like to hand off to John, who's going to tell us a little bit about Select USA.
Okay, thanks so much, Erica. Yeah, hello to everybody out there. I'm John Bridenstine, as Erica said, representing U.S. Department of Commerce, which is the home to Select USA. And if you look down on the bottom right-hand corner of that slide, you'll see our hashtag as well as our handle. If you want to follow us on Twitter, learn more about what kinds of things we're doing with the Select USA Tech Initiative, please do follow us there. Select USA is really an interagency initiative. It was launched by President Obama back in 2011. Even though it is housed in the Department of Commerce, it really incorporates the entire U.S. government, the federal government based in Washington, as well as around the United States and some of our export assistance centers and 72 markets overseas where we have representatives. We are an initiative that is geographically neutral, which basically means we can't sort of highlight opportunities in one destination or another. However, that being said, we've got great contacts and can facilitate those for you in locations across the United States, all 50 states, as well as in cities and regions and territories of the United States. So it's really a great sort of first point of contact for you in terms of trying to identify where it is that you want to be. Our clients are companies like you, but they are also the states, regions, counties, and cities, the economic development offices. So we are really sort of a facilitator between you and them. And anything that we can do to help you navigate sort of the federal process and the incentives and benefits that are out there, but also working together with the local and the state investment promotion agencies, really that's what we're here for. So we provide an information and counseling role as well as an ombudsman role across the federal government to really address investor concerns and issues. And again, helping you to navigate that is really a critical part of what we do. And at this point, what I thought I would do is just take a couple minutes to look, Eric, if you go to the next slide, to talk a little bit about the SelectUSA.gov website. And again, I would recommend that you get on here and you navigate around, play with it a little bit, because there's a tremendous amount of information out there that's available to you. And this is a screenshot of that first page when you log on to the Select USA website. And if you look at the bottom of that, you'll see a map of the United States. And because we remain geographically neutral, we provide you information about everything that's out there from the various states. So if you were to click on any one of those states, like for example here, you would find information from the state of California about the incentives, the benefits, all the permits, their investment guide, everything that you need to know about the various things related to doing business in California. So again, because we are geographically neutral, we play that role as a facilitator. We play that role as sort of the first stop where you can get all the information that you need. The other thing that I wanted to highlight, if you go to the resources, as Erica is navigating through the website right now, you'll come to a whole list of tools. The cluster mapping tool is one that I wanted to highlight for you, because what this will enable you to do is when you're trying to identify where you really need to be, and it could be the Silicon Valley, San Francisco, it could be New York, it could be Boston, Austin, it could be Chicago, Atlanta, but this is really a map which will help you to determine, based on a lot of data that folks have gone to the trouble of collecting and collating here, it will really help you to explore, where your customers are, where your potential partners might be, where the audience is that you're trying to reach. And I think, again, those are just two of the many tools that are available on the Select USA website. But I just encourage you to go onto the Select USA website, look at the tools, and look at the cluster map, and I think you'll find that there's a tremendous amount of information out there that will be very useful to you. So with that, we'll move on to the next slide. And I think, obviously the United States is always ranked among the, the top countries for fair, balanced, and competitiveness, the competitive business climate. You'll see some of the rankings there that are highlighted. But why is this? I mean, we're ranked at the top consistently because of a talented workforce that exists in the United States, lucrative consumer market, a strong R&D base, strong IP protection, transparent legal system, highly developed infrastructure, robust supply chains. I mean, productivity in the United States is rising, IPR protection is second to none, the rule of law. It's the world's largest market and growing. Most innovative entrepreneurs and best universities are in the United States, and energy. I put energy here, and it may not pertain to all of you at first glance, but again, it does figure into sort of the economic well-being of the United States and the competitiveness of the United States in general. The discovery of shale gas, which I'm sure you've read about, and the cost of energy really among the lowest levels that you'll find anywhere in the world. I mean, just to give you an example, about 6.1 cents per kilowatt hour at average in the United States, and it's about 16 cents per kilowatt hour in the UK, or as much as 33 cents per kilowatt hour in are bringing jobs back from Japan and Ford back from Mexico. And when you look at the next slide, please, Erica. When you look at the slide again that Honda is listed there, you think, well, we're talking about Select USA. Why is Honda up there? More Hondas are currently made in the United States of America than any place in the world. Samsung is revamping a plant in Austin, Texas, to the tune of about $4 billion. worth of investment. Siemens is hiring hundreds and hundreds of new workers in North Carolina and putting about $50 million a year into training in its U.S. workforce. So you saw on this slide that highlighted, the countries that are investing. Here's just a few companies that are investing. And again, I think it's just to give you a snapshot in terms of the amount of interest that is there from companies, maybe not exactly like those that are on this call today, but I think it gives you an indication about why the U.S. Is such a lucrative destination for foreign direct investment. So if we go to the next slide. So why do we care? Well, why do we as the U.S. government care? Why are we doing this? Why is this an initiative that's so important to our president and to the Department of Commerce and to those of us who work on behalf of Select USA? We're already the largest recipient of foreign direct investment, but 20.5% of all U.S. exports are actually manufactured by foreign-owned subsidiaries. Those are companies like yours that have invested in the United States, and they're responsible for a large percentage of our exports. Companies like yours are employing nearly 6 million people in the United States. And so obviously, our Select USA initiative is all about creating jobs and growth. So obviously that's very important to us. Good wages, good investments in R&D, investments in fixed assets. So this is all good stuff, for us, and that's why we're involved, and that's why we're excited about this initiative. So from a Select USA standpoint, why are we here on this call with you today? Again, it's all about jobs. It's all about growth. And our hope is that one or more of you startups will go on to be the next Google, the next LinkedIn, Yahoo, or Twitter, creating jobs by the hundreds, the thousands, or the tens of thousands. And these are tech jobs, well-paying tech jobs in the United States, and that's why we're so interested in working with you. And again, as Glenn had said earlier, and helping you to achieve the kind of success that you seek to achieve when you are in the United States launching and scaling your businesses. So if we go to the next slide. So we talked about why companies care, why countries care, why we care, so why should you care? The U.S. is a great target for expansion. It's a market of over 310 million consumers. And when you take into consideration NAFTA and all the other free trade agreements that we've got, again, the opportunities are virtually endless. The United States accounts for more than 55% of the global ICT research and development. Our tech buying sets the pace. The U.S. tech market continues to dominate the global tech market with a 40% share of all purchases. That's all in one country, the United States of America. And again, companies like Apple, Intel, and Motorola, as I mentioned before, with some of the others like Ford and Caterpillar, they are moving operations back home. Apple announced a new factory with 2,000 jobs making crystals to be used in its iPads. Intel, after having for years located plants in Asia and places like China, are opening its most advanced plant in the United States. Motorola is making phones in the U.S. at a plant in Texas, and again, the list goes on and on and on. So again, this is why we're very excited about this initiative, and we're very excited about the possibility of you all, going to the United States and launching and scaling. And really, we are here along with the other partners today on this call, really looking to do whatever it is that we can do to get you the information that you need to launch and scale in the United States. So let's just go to the next slide. I wanted to include this next slide because I thought this would be of interest to you. Probably not very surprising, but why are the most successful startups in the United States? And this actually comes from an article from Forbes magazine. But again, it's the role models that exist, the funding, the business infrastructure and distribution that exists in the United States, the tremendous monetization capabilities that exist in the United States for apps and software and the kinds of things that you all are involved in. The talent that exists, we talked about that in terms of the universities and the technical expertise, the practice management, production, and frankly the sheer serendipity. Just being surrounded by other people doing what you're doing, potential partners, potential customers, potential clients, and again, so it's just really a great place to do business. And so I think one thing that wasn't highlighted on this list here, but also that I've heard a lot about from talking to startups in the United States and some of the startups that we've worked with that have gone over there, the thing that they find most remarkable about the United States is simply the belief that things can happen. Startup companies, their belief that they can actually do this thing, and it's not just them, but it's their families, it's their communities that often rally behind them and help them raise capital. And again, it's just a really exciting time and an exciting place to be, and I would encourage you all to take a real serious look at that. So we just go to the last slide, please, Erica. And then finally, I just wanted to highlight for you, we were very honored and very pleased to be able to participate on this webinar today. We do a series of seminars called Select USA Tech Seminars, and we did one at Level 39 at March 10th, and we did one at the U.S. Ambassador's Residence in Dublin on the 25th. We've got some future ones scheduled in Edinburgh the 30th and Belfast the 21st. It's also a one-day seminar where we try to offer up for startups really everything they need to know related to sort of the legal, tax, insurance, visas, immigration issues related to doing business in the United States. We have a panel on accessing venture capital and debt financing and the U.S. market in general. We bring in a number of success stories or case studies, companies, local companies that have had success in the United States, but they also share, their lessons learned, where they crashed and burned, the good, the bad, and the ugly, as we like to call it. And there's so much to be learned from hearing from those who've gone before you. So, again, if you want to learn more about those things, follow us on Select USA Tech, and really we'd love to hear from you, because it's these kinds of events that we're doing today and the webinars and seminars that we do that we get great feedback from you and really hear what it is that you need to know, what it is that you want to know, the kinds of things that will sort of put you at ease or increase your comfort level when considering going to the United States. So we really hope to hear from you and appreciate you participating on this webinar. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Erica. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, John. Before we move on to the next section, we have a few questions and comments from the audience. First, just a quick note from Sam. Interesting. He said, what would set the U.S. apart? He just got a report this morning that there's $90 billion available in low-cost capital for foreign direct investment in manufacturing. That is fixed-rate funds available between 2 and 6% fixed rates. So that's kind of interesting to note. We have a question from Charles. He wants to know if you could expand upon how clusters are determined within the Select USA database.
It's actually not a Select USA database. It's a database that we gained access to, and because we find it to be such a wonderful tool that we really wanted to share it with folks, because we must remain geographically neutral, we can't sort of say, well, based on what I know, Charles, I think you should go to this market or that market. So it's basically a wealth of data that's been created and sort of curated, all available in one spot. And you'll see when you click on that tool, it takes you away from the Select USA website to the cluster mapping tool, and it really enables you to put in whatever factors are important to you or whatever factors by you which you would like to conduct your search to help you determine where it is that you really need to be. And so, there's employment growth. There's various sectors. So, for example, if you've got you're involved in fintech and you've got a financial app, and you want to see where are most people employed in the financial sector in the United States, or if it's media, or if it's retail, or if it's whatever the case might be, there are lots of search tools that are available there. Again, that will help you determine where you really need to be. And so it's something that I would commend to you.
Great, thanks. And then a question, I'm going back to what Glenn said at the very beginning. Someone wants to know, why does the U.S. ecosystem finish with a liquidity event?
I would say, my perspective on that, because I deal a lot with venture capitalists, is you have to think about who are the stakeholders in the company. So you as a founder, if you're motivated to have a long-term profitable business, God bless you. That's a great way to create wealth. However, think about your investors. What's their goal? Do they want to be long-term holders and have you hold on to their capital and receive dividends? There are some investors like that, but they don't tend to reside in Silicon Valley in venture capital offices. Those folks need to turn their capital over and return their capital to their investors, their limited partners. They have 10-year investment horizons for their funds. So they need liquidity. So if those are the kind of investors you've got, most of those investors are going to want a liquidity event.
Great, thanks. And then back to the cluster database, who owns and maintains that database, John?
That's a very good question. I'd have to go back to the website and take a look at that. But it's not the Department of Commerce. It's not Select USA.
Okay, great, thanks. So with that said, why don't we hold questions right now, and we're going to move on to Daniel Glazer from Fried Frank, and he's going to talk about some of the legal considerations in setting up your business in the United States.
Thanks, Erica, and good day, everyone. To keep today's discussion simple, I'm going to focus on 5 key legal issues to consider when expanding to the U.S. For a more complete overview, we've made our Coming to America U.S. legal guide available at our website, tech.friedfrank.com. So the first point to consider is consider your corporate structure. And early stage planning on creating a U.S. entity helps ensure that you're doing business in the most tax advantageous way possible. It helps build your non-U.S. companies to U.S. litigate and other liabilities. And there are a number of different decision points here. So the first is, should you open with a branch, a subsidiary, or a parent company? Now, a branch typically isn't advisable, among other reasons because U.S. liability can be attributed then directly to the non-U.S. company, and also because you'll potentially end up with 2 different tax authorities claiming against the same income. There's not as clear an answer, however, as to whether or not you should open with a U.S. subsidiary or a U.S. parent. So generally speaking, U.S. VC investors will want to see a non-U.S. company in the U.S. before investing. Now, historically, that's meant not only setting up a physical presence in the U.S., but also creating a U.S. top company over your non-U.S. company. However, for companies based in relatively lower tax jurisdictions, like the UK and Ireland, many U.S. investors are starting to see the benefits of having a non-U.S. parent company with a U.S. subsidiary, particularly in light of all the media attention that so-called inversion transactions are receiving, such as Pfizer's attempted acquisition of AstraZeneca. As you may have read, a significant reason for Pfizer's interest was the potential to create a UK top company with a U.S. subsidiary sitting under it. And the effective corporate tax rate in the UK is about half of the corporate tax rate in the U.S. when you combine U.S. state and federal taxes. So companies that start in countries like the UK and Ireland, startups that start in countries like the UK and Ireland, and then establish U.S. subsidiaries, thus come with those tax advantages already baked in, which potentially can help future valuation. And that being said, not all U.S. VC investors feel this way, and in fact, there are VC funds that will be limited by their private placement memoranda to investing only in U.S. companies. So it's a bit of a judgment call as to which route you go, whether or not to establish a U.S. subsidiary or a U.S. parent. But the key takeaway here is that it's important to think about it ahead of time. And to be clear, a substantial presence in the U.S., in other words, typically a founder or a strong U.S. team, is still generally expected to get U.S. VC investment. So a second decision point in creating your corporate structure is what is going to be your corporate form. Let's go back one slide, please. So the 2 most common forms by far are a corporation and a limited liability company, or an LLC. Now, with respect to a corporation, some of the considerations are that it's a long recognized U.S. corporate form. Investors and contracting counterparties are very comfortable with doing business with a corporation. Keep in mind, a corporation is taxed by the U.S. tax authorities, the Internal Revenue Service at the federal level, and state tax authorities as well. The corporation is taxed for its activities rather than the non-U.S. parent. And there's more corporate formalities when you have a corporation. You need to have a regular board meeting, keep meeting minutes, and similar corporate activities. A limited liability company is a much newer form. Now, one of the downsides is not all investors and other contracting counterparties are necessarily going to be as comfortable with an LLC as they are with a corporation. One of the main benefits of the LLC is flexibility. There are few corporate formalities, and when it's a sub of a non-U.S. company, you typically can choose as to whether or not the U.S. subsidiary or the non-U.S. parent is taxed by U.S. tax authorities. We're typically seeing corporations, I think simply because that form raises maybe somewhat fewer questions with investors and contracting counterparties, but ultimately either a corporation or an LLC works well. A third decision point on corporate structuring is the state of incorporation. The U.S. is made up of 50 different states, each with its own laws, and you can establish a company in any of them. That being said, Delaware is very often the state of choice. It has a quick and efficient incorporation process, very good laws protecting companies, and it gives you the flexibility to move. Lawyers all over the U.S. are willing to advise on Delaware corporate law, which is not necessarily the case if you incorporate in another state. That is, if you decide to set up in New York or California, it's very easy to get someone to advise on your Delaware incorporated business, even if your headquarters are in one of those other states. Finally, Delaware raises fewer questions among potential investors. They're used to seeing Delaware corporations. Now, to be clear, incorporating in Delaware doesn't mean you need to put your office there. It's very typical for a company to incorporate in Delaware and put its headquarters in a place like New York or California or Texas. You simply need to register to do business in the states outside of Delaware in which you maintain an office or otherwise have significant presence. So the second main legal issue to consider is intellectual property. And I'll focus on trademarks, patents, and non-disclosure agreements. With respect to trademarks, it's important to make sure that your trademark is cleared for use in the U.S. and that you protect it against unauthorized use by others. You don't want to invest time and effort in your brand only to be forced to stop using it or find yourself unable to protect it. So first, keep in mind that your non-U.S. trademark registration doesn't give you U.S. protection. Trademarks are jurisdiction specific. They're country specific. Second, keep in mind that unregistered brands get broad protection in the U.S. Although a registration provides significant benefits, a company that's already in the U.S. using a trademark without a registration can stop a later company from using that mark in connection with similar products or services. Third, not only might pre-existing identical marks create a problem for you, but similar variations also will be given protection. The example I usually give is if you came into the U.S. To sell Coca-Cola soda spelled with all Ks, you know, you might do a search and see no one else selling under that brand, but I guarantee you that you would get a very nasty letter from a company in Atlanta, Georgia, telling you to stop selling your Coca-Cola branded soda even though it's spelled with all Ks. As a result, searching the U.S. Trademark Office website doesn't mean that you're in the clear. It's typically worth having your U.S. trademark lawyer commission a trademark clearance search to ensure that there's nothing already being used that could cause a problem. Now, if you are clear to use your mark in the U.S., you likely want to file to register your mark even if U.S. expansion isn't immediately imminent. As a non-U.S. company, you can file based on a real intent to eventually use the mark in the U.S. or based on a filing in another country. Unlike a U.S.-based company, as a non-U.S. company, you can even obtain a registration based in the U.S. based on a registration in another company, in another country rather, without use in the U.S. So the second point on IP is with respect to patents. You want to take a fresh look at patenting in the United States. The U.S. offers much broader patent protection than other jurisdictions for software and software-enabled business methods. So if you're thinking about going to the U.S., have your non-U.S. patent lawyer also consider U.S. patent standards, maybe even speak to a U.S. patent lawyer when formulating a patent strategy for your company. And the third point are non-disclosure agreements and confidential information. So NDAs are very important for protecting your confidential information. And I want to bring up a couple of points about U.S. practices. Now, keep in mind that U.S. venture capital investors typically are not going to sign NDAs when speaking with you about your business and your business plan. You need to be aware of which VCs have a good reputation and be careful about giving away any core trade secrets too early on in potential investment discussions. For other U.S. business and contracting partners, it's very typical to use an NDA when exchanging confidential information. Now, there's increasingly a trend in the U.S. toward time-limited NDAs where the confidentiality obligations expire after an agreed number of years. This means that whatever you disclose can essentially be posted on the internet after that period is over. So as a result, it's important to pay attention to the issue of the time limitation in what otherwise looks like a standardized document. If you don't have enough bargaining leverage to modify that, you'll need to pay close attention to what you're disclosing over the course of your business relationship with the other entity to make sure that that time period, that time limitation doesn't mean you end up just disclosing down the road that you never intended to disclose to the public. Next slide. So the third primary legal consideration is to create U.S. Standardized terms and conditions, to have a U.S. form contract for your contracting counterparties. As a general matter, if your U.S. counterparty has bargaining leverage, they'll likely resist entering into a contract governed by non-U.S. law. You're much more likely to get your U.S. counterparty to accept or start from your standard terms and conditions if they're governed by the laws of a U.S. state. That being said, if it's a large company with a lot of bargaining leverage, you're still unlikely to get them to accept your form, and you may have to work off theirs instead. Still, even if you are forced to work from the other company's terms and conditions, having your U.S. form at the ready will give you an arsenal of provisions that you may want to try and incorporate into that other party's form to get you a better deal. Now, keep in mind that there's no such thing as U.S. contract law, and you'll typically pick the law of a state that bears some relation to where your primary place of business is. And this is another benefit of Delaware, by the way. You'll often see companies from different states, let's say a New York company and a California company, maybe argue or negotiate over the law that should govern their contract. But one easy compromise often ends up being Delaware. In other words, even though one company might have its headquarters in New York and the other company might have its headquarters in California, they'll both end up being incorporated in Delaware and then can use Delaware as a common ground compromise to govern their contract. Now, as an aside, state contract laws are broadly similar around the U.S., but there can be significant differences. And keep in mind that the larger commercial centers, New York, California, Texas, Illinois, Delaware, typically have much more well-developed and more predictable contract law than states with somewhat less commercial activity. Next slide. The fourth issue I'll cover is the U.S. litigation landscape. Now, for better or for worse, the U.S. is fairly litigious, which results in a more aggressive business culture. There are fewer disincentives to litigate. Unlike in the U.K. and many other jurisdictions, the loser doesn't typically pay the winner's legal fees. In other words, each party bears its own costs in a given litigation, regardless of who has the better case. And filing a lawsuit can be relatively cheap. And there are plenty of attorneys who are willing to represent companies on a contingency basis, so that it may not even cost a company anything to file a lawsuit unless it actually wins the lawsuit or recovers some sort of money in settlement. By contrast, defending a lawsuit often can be very costly. Each side is allowed to demand information and documents for the other through a process called discovery, and that process can get very time-consuming and very costly. As a result, litigation often is used as a business tool to force settlement. In fact, something like 95% of all U.S. litigation gets settled before resolution at trial. What happens is that companies often will settle disputes out of court to avoid litigation expenses, even if they believe that they have a better case against the other party. It's simply cheaper, just simply good business judgment to pay the settlement than to fight it out and bear the cost of litigation, even if you ultimately win the litigation. Now, there are a few ways to mitigate these risks, and the first is insurance. You can get insurance, typically at a reasonable cost, to protect against many different kinds of U.S. litigation and liability risks. Another way to mitigate the risk is through a rigorous compliance program. It's important to make sure that you're complying with the terms of your contracts and any applicable U.S. laws. And finally, you should make sure to the extent that you can to enter into clear, unambiguous contracts. It's important to make sure that both sides to a contract know what they're signing. Very often, litigation results from contracts that are ambiguous. each party thinks that a given provision means something different. But typically, from what we see, that the better the contracts you enter into, the clearer that they are, the less likely you are to have future disputes. Next slide. So a final point, as I often say, is don't overpay or underutilize lawyers when expanding to the U.S. And here's what I mean by that. Getting these initial legal points right isn't reinventing the wheel. And getting high-quality early-stage legal services in the U.S. should be relatively cost-effective. As Glenn noted, many U.S. Providers are willing to offer early-stage legal services on a fixed-fee basis so that there's transparency up front and an ability to accurately budget for expected legal costs. You should insist on the outset to understand the legal services you'll be provided and how much they'll cost. Now, that being said, the litigation landscape does create a somewhat less forgiving business culture and creates a real incentive to getting things right the first time. While the issues we covered are typically relatively inexpensive to get right at the outset, they can be costly to fix later. And perhaps more so than in other jurisdictions, it's important to not try to go it alone and to use your legal advisor appropriately so that you can concentrate on doing business.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan. And before we move on to a discussion around visas, we have a few legal questions here. First, someone wants to know, do you know whether setting up tax-exempt entities in the United States is being encouraged?
Well, I wouldn't say that tax-exempt is not the right word. I mean, it's more considering tax structuring in a way that is advantageous to your business and makes the most sense based on where you want to do business. The structures that we described at the outset are certainly not tax exempt. It's just deciding, does it make more sense to, let's say, have a U.S. topco and let's say a UK subsidiary, or a UK topco and a U.S. subsidiary, based on the relative tax laws of the two jurisdictions. But it's not really a matter of tax exemption. It's a matter of just of tax planning.
Okay, thanks. And then this is a question specific to an audience member's company, but I thought it might be interesting to ask. But if there's follow-up questions on this, we can follow up offline. But Joe, who's from a Bitcoin startup, is asking what you would advise given the regulatory stance being unclear for their technology. So, you know, in this case, what happens if a company like this relocates and then gets shut down?
If a company where the regulatory landscape is unclear relocates to the U.S., you know, I think I would just take a hard look at where the center of your business is. I mean, you're going to need to take legal advice, you know, as to what extent you're going to be able to operate in the U.S. You know, with Bitcoin relative to other jurisdictions. And I think that, you know, getting into that in great detail, sort of beyond the scope of this call, but I think I would suffice it to say that you're going to want to understand what you can and can't do before committing the entirety of your resources to the U.S. I mean, it's the same sort of thing with respect to crowdfunding. Is that the rules surrounding crowdfunding, or the regulatory landscape around crowdfunding, is a little bit different in the U.S. than it is in other jurisdictions, and we see that you know, companies that focus on crowdfunding are taking a slightly different approach to the U.S. as they are in other jurisdictions. It's just a matter of, before you decide to commit significant resources, to making sure that you understand and get U.S. legal advice on you know, what you can and cannot do given the U.S. regulatory landscape.
Great, thanks so much. So moving on, we were going to have Ben give a little overview of business visas for the U.S. Ben has been unable to join us today, so we're going to have Glenn just speak briefly to these slides. And if anyone has follow-up questions about visas, Ben's contact information will be included at the end of this presentation, so you can follow up specifically with him. So for that note, I'll send it over to you, Glenn, to talk about visas.
Great. Thanks, Erica. This is an area that I have some experience with, being on the accountancy side, helping companies with payroll, contract issues, contractors. We often come across how do we deal with the immigration attorneys, how do we help people get H-1B visas and those kinds of things. And what I would tell you is that after speaking with Ben and listening to his presentation, I came away with a couple of really strong takeaways. One of which is that the U.S. government, when it has a tax treaty in place with a foreign country, has programs in place to really expedite the process of getting someone from a foreign country into the U.S. for the purposes of doing business. And as this slide points out, there are 4 primary ways to do business in the U.S. There's the visa waiver program, and that's if you're infrequently coming to the U.S. So that's something that's available to you. Then occasional business travel through the B1 or business visa. Then the L1, the intra-company transfer visa, that's both a USA and a foreign company being involved. And then the last section that we're going to spend most of our time talking about, which was eye-opening for me, which is the E1, E2 treaty, trader, and investor visas. So in the e-visa program, it's designed to promote trade and investment into the U.S. As I just mentioned, the E1 and E2 visa program, when we talk about the highlights about those programs, you're going to see why they are so compelling. We believe that these are a great fit for IT, technology companies, and other businesses that are looking to come to the U.S. Easy to apply for, fairly low cost, quick turnaround. Well, from the U.S. government's perspective, anything less than 90 days is quick. In the startup world, a lot can happen in 90 days, can it? And then you can just apply through a local American embassy. As you know, U.S. embassies are all over the place, aren't we? And then we have the advantage of having 80+ treaties in place. Most of Europe is accessible through these treaties. And then there's a website for your convenience that can give you some easy ideas about how to follow up. So we can go to the next slide. We're just going to touch here on kind of the highlights about what an E1, E2 visa is. So the E1 is for a more established company that's looking to staff here in the U.S. And the E2 is set up for startup companies. So the threshold for the E2 is a little bit easier to reach for someone who's just getting going. So we can go to the next slide, Erica. We're going to talk a little bit more detail about the difference between the E1 and the E2. So as we said before, there's got to be an existing treaty in place. Company has to be 50% owned by the treaty national.
Hey, Glenn?
Yep.
Hey, this has been, sorry, we're having some technical difficulties. Not that I want to jump in, you're doing an excellent job, but do you mind if I finish up?
Please do.
All right, I have to apologize for that, folks. Glenn's done an excellent job so far, so I'll just stick with the last 2, then we'll finish up with follow-up questions. As he said, the E1, E2 business visa program is an excellent program, especially for startups. Here in London, we see hundreds, literally hundreds of these businesses come in each and every year looking to set up in the United States. There are 2 major subclasses in the E-visa program, the E1 visa, which is the treaty trader, and the E2 visa, which is the treaty investor. There are subtle differences between them, but both of them are still really good fits for the visa program, especially startup companies. Just to go over the requirements real quick, the E-visa program, in the E1 class there are 7 major requirements. Most of them are pretty self-explanatory, but there's a couple of them that I should, that catch small businesses, especially startup businesses. First of all, there has to be a treaty in place between the U.S. and your country. As Glenn said before on the previous slide, there's currently about 83 treaties in place. This generally covers most of the European countries, your NAFTA countries, United States, Canada. Japan is a big country, Korea. Other legacy ones, Iran is a member of the treaties and stuff and so forth. The one thing that there are no treaties between the BRIC countries, which is a real downer because there's a lot of businesses that would really love to use this program. The second requirement ownership is a big issue when it comes to the E1 and E2 visa companies, especially small startups, because a lot of times they'll sell out to VC funding like first thing, and they'll lose control of their company. Unfortunately, the way the treaty is written, the ownership of the company follows the nationality of the person who holds the shares. If your company is 75% owned by a nebulous venture capital fund, you're not going to be able to meet the E1, E2 nationality requirements. A good example of like what would meet it was, let's say you have a company, you have 3 people, equal ownership, you have 2 British guys and a German. The way we view nationality, it's not based on where the company is incorporated, it's based on the who actually owns the share certificates. So in this case, we would see the company as British, even if it's registered in Delaware or if it's registered in the Cayman Islands or so forth. This tends to be a sticking point with especially the startup companies. So this is a very good point to point out to people. The third requirement, what must constitute trade, what we define as trade is pretty much any good, service, anything in between the two you could possibly think of, we count it as trade. We tend to be pretty flexible on that. Number 4 and number 5, the trade must be substantial. With the E1 visa program, you need to already have trade in place. You already need to have your company set up. You already need to have trade going back and forth. It's not hypothetical trade. It's not possible trade. You need to have trade already established. You need to have it already in place. And one of the quirks of the E1 visa requirements is 50% of the trade has to take place between the treaty country and the United States. So in the case, let's say we had a British startup, once again, like 50% of their trade has to take place between the U.S. and the U.K. It cannot be between the U.K., Germany, like 75%, and the U.S. 25%. So this sometimes causes problems with companies, and which is why sometimes it's better to do an E2, but I'll get to that on the next page. With the E1 and E2 companies, these are visas for skilled employees. These are not unskilled labor visas. These are for the executives. These are for the supervisors. These are for your coders. These are for the guys that like really going to make a difference to your company. They're not for the burger flippers. They're not for the sandwich chefs and so forth. These are technical positions. These are supervisorial executive positions, and that's what these visas are meant for. And the 7th major requirement, and this is a tough one, is you simply have to promise to leave the United States once your visa is expired. So, if we could, can we go to the next slide and go over with E2s? All right, the E2 visa program is for treaty investors. Once again, the United States has kind of a different definition for immigration purposes of what is an investment. It's not taking money and putting it into like a stock account. It's not blindly investing into a company. What we mean by investment is you need to actually set up a business in the States. You need to invest in equipment. You need to invest in goods, services, materials, so forth. That's what we mean by this program. And the goal of this program, I think it was alluded to on a couple of slides before, was to invest and get people to invest in the United States economy. That is the whole goal, the whole purpose of this program is to encourage investment in the U.S. economy. Number 1 and number 2 requirements are the same as on the E1 visa program. Let's see, the third one, investment. What we're looking at is to make sure that the people that are investing in these programs are irrevocably committed to them. The last thing we want to see is someone go and promise to invest a good bit of money in the States and then just abscond and run away with their visa, and we don't see them. What we want is people to invest in the States. We want them to work in their business. We want them to grow the American economy. That is the whole point of this. But with that said, what we count as investment tends to be if you purchase a business, transferred assets, cash, and especially for small businesses, especially for IT businesses, we look at it. We count IP. If you're a small business over here and you're setting an app, you build a website, you generated some IP, that stuff counts towards your investment. If you any of that stuff you put in there, you can count towards your investment in the United States. We see that quite a bit. We see people that they put thousands upon thousands of hours on building a website and building apps and building stuff like that. And then when they come down to actually applying for the visa, they have no assets, or they say they have no assets. We count IP. IP is a major thing that we count, and that will help your visa process along. Our fourth major requirement is it has to be a real business. We see people trying to abuse the program all the time. We see them come in with hobby businesses, things that look like businesses. We reviewed enough of these that we could tell the difference. It has to be a real business. It has to be a functioning business that has goods, customers, services, generates money, does all the things businesses should do. The fifth requirement is it has to be a substantial investment. There is no set dollar amount for what we count as an investment. It just has to be enough to guarantee that the business will be able to start up, will be able to start going, will be able to do what it's got to do. There is no dollar figure. Some people like to say you have to invest $100,000. There is no dollar figure. There is no set amount. We see small businesses, we see IT companies come in and their investment is in the tens of thousands of dollars, and that still counts. Then on the flip side, we see other people coming in with investments of $1 billion. That counts as well. But due to the fact there's so many different types of businesses that apply for this, there is no set dollar amount. You just have to be able to invest enough money to get your business up off the ground and have the potential to generate income in the future. Which goes to number 6. Once again, the overarching goal of this is to generate money for the U.S. economy. It has to be a real business, and it has to be able to generate money. You're generally given like 5 years to turn your investment around, to start generating a profit, contributing to the American economy, hiring staff. All that stuff counts towards what we count as marginality. Let's see. As in on the previous one as well, this is not a visa for unskilled labor. You have to be in a possession. You have to be a supervisor. You need to be executive. You need to have essential skills, and also the owner of the company has to be in a position to develop and direct the company. Which sometimes this gets to be a problem with small IT companies, because we know at the end of the day that they're trying to sell the business. We understand all that, but this is to stop the companies that are going over there, and this is just a workaround for the H-1B program and stuff. The people that are going over there, setting up these companies, need to be in a position to develop and direct their business and control their business. And then, which takes us to the last requirement. At the end of the day, when the applicant comes in, they have to promise to leave the United States once their visa is expired. And once again, I apologize for the technical issues, but Glenn did an absolutely wonderful job. If you got any other questions on visas, please let me know, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ben. Sorry about those technical difficulties. We do have a number of questions from the audience on visas, but we are very close to the end of our session. So I'm going to move on to Glenn. And again, if you've entered a question that has not been answered, you can expect an email follow-up answer to your question. So that said, Glenn, can you tell us, we just have a few minutes here, I'm sorry, but a little bit about the practical concerns when it comes to bringing your business to the United States?
Sure. I'm going to be like Mark Cavendish, who unfortunately is not going to be able to sprint to a stage win at the tour this year, but we're going to zip right through this. If you do, in fact, decide to come to the States, I think the one takeaway I'd like to leave you with is print these slides out and bring them with you. Find a service provider who is knowledgeable about these issues. You do not need to be knowledgeable about these issues, but your service provider needs to be. So my firm in particular, this is the type of stuff that we specialize in, so that we can take care of these issues and you as a founder don't need to worry about it. So let's just zip right through it. You know, as Dan talked about, the type of the entity is important. You will need to register your business both at the federal, which is the U.S., the state, which would be California, and the local, which might be San Francisco. All those levels of where your business is located require a registration. If there is a tax sharing agreement, so between the UK and most European countries, there is a tax sharing agreement, so you need to know that. Move on to the next slide. Hiring and staffing considerations. Just need to think about it, okay? Are you going to employ people as full-time employees, or are they going to be contractors? I assume they have that same sort of distinction in other countries. Someone that you're employing here in the U.S. is treated differently than someone who is a contractor. Both in terms of your payroll taxes and in terms of your obligations towards those people. And it's not something where you can just flip a coin and say, oh, they're going to be a contractor or employee. It has to do with the nature of the business relationship that you have with those folks. And then you have to think about how you're going to pay them, and we could help you figure those kinds of things out. The one important thing to think about is forms of compensation. If you're going to bring on U.S. Tech people, there is an expectation that some sort of stock option or some sort of upside compensation will be part of their employment package. Your attorney could help you, think through those issues. We're not going to really talk here about payroll tax issues. The only issue you need to know is that if you do have a headquarters or a real business presence here in the U.S. and you happen to be a UK citizen, you will be taxed as if you're a U.S. citizen. That's just part of the tax treaty, and that's part of a concept called permanent establishment. Next slide, Erica. We've already kind of covered these sorts of issues through John and his presentation about trying to figure out what is driving you to come to the U.S. Will that location influence your success? If it's accessing capital, you're more likely going to want to be in New York or San Francisco, but access to customers and certain types of markets are going to be important too. So here in the U.S., there's a very well-established co-location business model, and there's all sorts of ways that a co-location service can provide added value to you folks. So depending on what business that you are and how far along you are as a business and what particular aspect, whether it's marketing or technology or what it is that you're trying to come to the U.S. to accomplish, there are different co-location spaces or even accelerators that might appeal to you. And then just, once again, print it out and keep it on file. Something you need to worry about. As if any other country that you happen to be doing business in, that there are tax compliance responsibilities. So we just got them listed out here. Income tax, foreign entity filings. We don't need to go into what all of these things are. As I said, print it out, bring it with you, make sure your service provider can touch on these things for you.
Great. Thank you so much, Glenn. That was an impressive sprint. As we said, this presentation will be mailed out to all of you by tomorrow, so you'll have access to all this content as well as this link to the Coming to America, the Legal Basics Guide that Dan Glazer mentioned. I apologize for going a few minutes over and for not getting to everybody's questions, but we will be following up by email or by Twitter as well. Also just wanted to make a quick reference to the fact that part 2 of this webinar series will be coming up on September 17th, and in that session we'll be focusing on accessing U.S. capital. So everyone who's attending today will receive an invitation to that follow-up part 2 webinar. You can also check out our events page on earlygrowthfinancialservices.com to see the registration page for this and other upcoming events. So that said, thank you so much. Sorry we went a few minutes over. We really appreciate your time and hope you found today useful. Again, all these follow-up questions will be followed up by our presenters directly. Keep entering them in if you have any others, and we will get to them. And thanks so much to John and Dan and Ben and Glenn for a fantastic presentation. And have a great week, everyone. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.